In a world that still struggles to fully embrace LGBTQ+ identities, being openly gay can be a heavy challenge. Now imagine carrying that weight while also navigating the spotlight as a black entertainer, where every move is scrutinized and reputations can make or break a career. For many, the pressure was so intense that they felt forced to keep their truth locked away. Behind the applause, the headlines, and the Hollywood glamour were personal stories of secrecy, sacrifice, and survival. Today, we're uncovering 20 black actors and performers who reportedly tried to hide their secret gay affairs. Figures whose lives remind us how much courage it takes to be authentic when the world isn't ready to accept you. Noble Johnson, Hollywood's silent pioneer with a hidden life. Noble Johnson may not be a household name today, but in the early 1900s, he was breaking barriers few black actors had ever crossed. Born in 1881, Johnson had a striking versatility that made him invaluable to silent cinema. With his mixed heritage and commanding screen presence, he could slip into roles ranging from Native American warriors to Arab sheiks to Mexican revolutionaries. But his greatest legacy came off-screen. He founded the Lincoln Motion Picture Company in 1916, the first black-owned studio in Hollywood, determined to create dignified roles for African-American audiences. Yet, while Johnson fought for representation on screen, his personal life remained carefully veiled. Hollywood insiders whispered that he shared more than just a professional bond with actor Clarence Brooks, a frequent collaborator at Lincoln Pictures. The two men even lived together for years, officially as roommates and business partners. Others in the industry noted that Johnson never married, unusual for a man of his stature at the time. Rumors swirled around his close male friendships and discreet appearances at private gatherings. Though the black press of the era often shielded successful figures from scandal. Within Hollywood circles, Johnson's secret was considered an open secret. He protected his privacy fiercely, granting interviews that only touched on his work, never his heart. Clarence Muse, the Renaissance man with a secret score. Clarence Muse was more than just an actor. He was a lawyer, composer, playwright, and cultural force who appeared in over 150 films. Born in 1889, he blended intellect with artistry, even penning "When It's Sleepy Time Down South," a song that became Louis Armstrong's signature. On stage and screen, Muse commanded respect, but behind closed doors, his private life was often the subject of gossip. By the 1930s, Muse was frequently spotted with younger male actors and musicians. His close relationship with fellow actor Rex Ingram raised eyebrows, especially when the two were seen together in Harlem's jazz clubs. Married since 1912, Muse often traveled alone and reportedly maintained separate living arrangements from his wife. Letters exchanged with his male friends contained affectionate language that seemed unusual for the time. One relationship that drew particular attention was with a young composer named James, who worked as his arranger. The two were inseparable in the late 1930s, often staying together at Muse's Los Angeles home. When James suddenly disappeared from his circle around 1940, whispers spread that Muse's wife had discovered the affair. Muse never publicly acknowledged these rumors, but his double life reflected the pressure on black artists to appear respectable, even as their hearts longed for authenticity. Dooley Wilson, the man who played it again. Audiences around the world remember him as Sam, the piano player in Casablanca, but Dooley Wilson's story was far more complicated than the silver screen revealed. Born in 1886, Wilson began his career as a drummer and singer, only stumbling into acting later. Ironically, he couldn't even play the piano. His iconic performance was dubbed. Yet while his voice immortalized "Play It Again," Wilson's personal life was an unscripted drama. In his vaudeville days during the 1910s, rumors about his romantic preferences followed him from city to city. He was known for forming deep attachments to younger male musicians, none more significant than Bobby Martin, a fellow performer he met in Chicago. Their bond was so strong that Martin followed Wilson to Los Angeles when his acting career took off. The closeness between the two men didn't go unnoticed. Studio executives reportedly advised Wilson to consider marriage for appearances. In 1949, he wed Grace Johnson, a former chorus girl, but industry whispers called it a marriage of convenience. Grace herself was rumored to prefer women. Wilson and Martin remained inseparable until Martin's death in 1954, after which Wilson grew reclusive. Behind the legend of Casablanca, there was a man whose greatest performance may have been hiding his true self. Robert Earl Jones, a stage talent with shadows behind the curtain. Robert Earl Jones, father of the legendary James Earl Jones, carved out his own career in the theater and later in film. Born in 1910, he faced the racial barriers of 1930s and 40s Hollywood, but his determination kept him on stage and screen, eventually landing roles in classics like The Sting and Trading Places. Yet his private life was marked by choices that fueled lasting whispers. Jones left his young family when James was just a boy, and for years the story was framed as abandonment. But insiders suggested there was more to it. He was rumored to be romantically involved with a male theater director in New York, a scandalous revelation for the time. Other accounts spoke of a wealthy white patron who supported him financially in exchange for companionship, giving Jones the means to pursue acting without constant financial strain. When the patron's family uncovered the arrangement, the relationship ended abruptly, leaving Jones scrambling for stability. These secretive liaisons forced him into discretion, a double life where he balanced ambition with fear of exposure. For Robert Earl Jones, the stage was a place of freedom, but offstage, love and survival came with compromise and silence. Howard Rollins, the star who hid behind the spotlight. Howard Rollins seemed destined for greatness. Born in 1950, he burst onto Hollywood's radar with a gripping performance in Ragtime, earning an Oscar nomination that should have launched a superstar career. With his handsome looks and undeniable talent, he was poised to break barriers for black actors. But his personal battles became as infamous as his professional triumphs. Almost from the start, Rollins's sexuality was the subject of speculation. Unlike many peers, he rarely appeared with female companions, and when he did, the relationship seemed more for show than substance. Insiders whispered about his closeness with a male costume designer he met while filming A Soldier's Story. The two were often seen together in West Hollywood, careful to arrive and leave separately, but spotted just the same. The designer was openly gay within industry circles and deeply devoted to Rollins, who struggled with the weight of denial. To cope with the pressure of hiding his true self, Rollins turned to drugs and alcohol, habits that derailed his once bright career. A public relationship with a female model, engineered by his management, only deepened his private conflict. Behind his dazzling performances, Howard Rollins was a man caught between talent, truth, and the crushing expectations of Hollywood. Juano Hernández, breaking barriers, guarding secrets. Juano Hernández was one of the first Afro-Puerto Rican actors to earn recognition in Hollywood, celebrated for breaking stereotypes in films like Intruder in the Dust and The Breaking Point. Born in 1896, he carried himself with dignity, avoiding the caricatured roles often handed to black actors of his era. His choice to remain private and avoid the Hollywood social circuit only deepened curiosity about his personal life. Hernández never married, unusual for a man of his age and success. Instead, his name was linked to intimate friendships with male directors and actors. One Broadway director who cast him in multiple plays was a particularly close companion, with letters later discovered suggesting an affection that went beyond professional respect. His longest partnership was with a younger man named Miguel, who served as his assistant and companion for over a decade. To the outside world, Miguel was Hernández's manager, but those who knew them well saw a partnership that looked much like a marriage. When Miguel died unexpectedly in 1955, Hernández reportedly sank into grief that affected his career for years. For Hernández, the fight against stereotypes extended beyond his acting. His very life was a balancing act between quiet authenticity and public discretion. Donny Hathaway, a soulful voice with silent struggles. Donny Hathaway's music could move mountains. Born in 1945, he became one of soul's most gifted voices, creating timeless classics like The Ghetto and unforgettable duets with Roberta Flack. His talent seemed limitless, but his inner life carried shadows he rarely spoke about. Throughout the 1970s, whispers circulated in the music industry about Hathaway's relationships with men. Married with 2 daughters, he maintained a family life in public, yet close friends noted how often male producers and musicians were fixtures in his home. His long hours with producer Jerry Wexler raised eyebrows, while his deep bond with fellow soul star Curtis Mayfield fueled rumors that their connection went beyond music. Hathaway's brilliance was matched by his torment. Diagnosed with severe mental health issues, he often battled paranoia and depression. Friends quietly speculated that the strain of hiding his sexuality in a world that demanded conformity only worsened his condition. In 1979, Hathaway's tragic death, jumping from a hotel window, left fans reeling. While his reasons remained debated, some who knew him believed the pain of living 2 lives weighed heavily on him. His voice endures as pure magic, but Donny Hathaway's story is also one of a man silenced by fear in a world unready for his truth. Nick Stewart, the man behind the curtain. Nick Stewart is best remembered for playing Lightning on Amos and Andy, but his career stretched far beyond a single role. Born in 1910, he became a versatile entertainer, working in radio, film, and eventually founding the Ebony Showcase Theater in Los Angeles, the first black-owned theater of its kind. His work gave countless black performers a stage when Hollywood offered few opportunities. Yet Stewart's personal life was always shrouded in speculation. Known for his long bachelorhood, he spent years in the close company of male actors and directors. The most talked-about bond was with a young actor named David, who served as his assistant director at Ebony Showcase. David was not only Stewart's creative partner, but also his constant companion, often seen living in his home and accompanying him to industry events. Colleagues quietly assumed they were partners, though the 2 men never confirmed it. Later in life, Stewart did marry, but insiders viewed it as more a partnership of respectability than romance. His wife was a former actress rumored to prefer women, making the marriage a practical arrangement that shielded both. For Stewart, the stage was a space of courage and innovation. But offstage, the freedom he gave others was something he struggled to claim for himself. Rex Ingram, a towering presence with hidden affections. With his deep voice and commanding presence, Rex Ingram stood out in Hollywood's golden age. Born in 1895, he became a powerful character actor in films like The Green Pastures and Cabin in the Sky. His performances often exuded authority, but his personal life revealed a man who lived under the radar. Ingram married actress Francine Everett, yet those who knew them suggested the union was more professional alliance than romance. He frequently traveled alone, and when he did have company, it was usually young male actors or close companions. His deep friendship with Clarence Muse was the subject of industry whispers, especially when they were seen together at private gatherings away from Hollywood's spotlight. One of Ingram's closest relationships was with a young protege who appeared alongside him in films. They were nearly inseparable until the late 1940s, when the younger actor abruptly left Hollywood. Insiders suggested studio pressure forced them apart, a harsh reminder of how tightly personal lives were policed. Despite these challenges, Ingram maintained his dignity and career, leaving behind roles that resonated with depth and power. Behind the towering figure audiences admired was a man who had to bury his heart in silence. Canada Lee, fighter in the ring, fighter for his truth. Canada Lee was more than an actor. He was a boxer, a civil rights activist, and one of the first black performers to take on complex, dignified roles in Hollywood. Born in 1907, he starred in Lifeboat and Body and Soul, proving that black actors could portray characters with depth and humanity. But behind the scenes, his personal life drew quiet speculation. Lee married twice, yet both unions were brief. Rumors swirled about his close relationships with fellow actors and intellectuals. His bond with writer Richard Wright, author of Native Son, raised eyebrows when Lee played the lead role in its stage adaptation. Even more scrutinized was his deep friendship with actor Robert Earl Jones. Their correspondence hinted at emotional intimacy that went beyond camaraderie, though both men carefully guarded their reputations. Living during a time of intense racial and political pressure, Lee knew exposure could ruin his career and his activism. He kept his private life in the shadows, focusing instead on his art and social justice work. Still, whispers followed him in Harlem's private parties, where he found community away from the public eye. Canada Lee's legacy is one of courage and integrity. Yet, like many of his peers, his truest self could only exist behind closed doors. Jermaine Stewart, pop star caught between image and identity. Jermaine Stewart lit up the 1980s with his infectious hit, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," a song that ironically became an anthem about restraint, while his own life was filled with secrets. Born in 1957, Stewart was flamboyant, fashionable, and fearless on stage, with dance moves and style that made him an MTV darling. To fans, his charisma felt effortless, but the industry worked hard to control his image. Stewart's sexuality was perhaps the worst-kept secret in music circles. He had long-term relationships with men, including a dancer named Marcus who appeared in his videos, and later a British producer named Simon who often stayed at his home. Yet publicly, they were introduced only as collaborators or friends. The conflict between authenticity and expectation weighed heavily on Stewart. His label believed that being openly gay would hurt his career, so his personal life was erased from interviews and press coverage. Friends recalled him confiding that living two lives was exhausting, being flamboyant enough to excite audiences while hiding the relationships that gave his life meaning. Jermaine Stewart's voice brought joy to millions, but his story reflects the heavy toll fame and secrecy can exact on an artist yearning to be free. Billy Daniels. The Black Sinatra with two stories to tell. With his velvet voice and magnetic stage presence, Billy Daniels was often called the Black Sinatra. Born in 1915, he made "That Old Black Magic" his signature, performing it over 5,000 times across nightclubs in New York, Las Vegas, and beyond. On stage, he was suave, sophisticated, and adored by audiences. Off stage, his life was more complicated. Daniels married 3 times, but industry gossip painted his marriages as strategic more than romantic. Observers noted how alive he seemed in the company of male collaborators. His relationship with pianist and arranger Gerald Cook became central to both his career and personal life. Cook traveled with him, lived with him, and managed nearly every detail of his performances. Letters between Daniels and fellow entertainer Herb Jeffries revealed another layer of intimacy, filled with affectionate language that hinted at more than friendship. As Daniels grew older, he often visited Jeffries in Europe, always traveling alone to avoid scrutiny. His nightclub shows contained playful double entendres, subtle winks that LGBTQ fans recognized as coded acknowledgments. Club owners even noticed that his audiences were unusually diverse for the time. Billy Daniels may have kept his private truth under wraps, but his artistry carried a freedom he couldn't always claim for himself. Cab Calloway. The showman behind the spotlight. Few performers embodied pure entertainment like Cab Calloway. Born in 1907, he lit up the Cotton Club with his wild energy, scat singing, and flamboyant white tuxedos. Songs like Minnie the Moocher made him an icon, and his influence stretched across jazz, swing, and even modern pop culture. But while his stage persona was larger than life, his private world carried whispers of hidden romances. Calloway was married, first to his childhood sweetheart Winona, and later to Zulmi, but insiders noticed his strongest bonds often came from within his troupe. His close friendship with dancer and choreographer Bayard Nicholas raised eyebrows as the two traveled and performed together constantly. Even more gossip surrounded his relationship with Charles, his flamboyant wardrobe designer who lived in Calloway's home for several years. Officially his stylist, Charles was often described as far more than an employee. Band members also spoke of Calloway's closeness with a young trumpet player named Tommy, who quickly became his shadow both on and off stage. These friendships existed discreetly, protected by the fast-moving life of tours and nightclubs. Cab Calloway built an image as a family man and community leader, but those who knew him best believed his truest happiness came when surrounded by male performers who shared his love of spectacle and freedom. Alvin Ailey, dance revolutionary, life in shadows. Alvin Ailey transformed American dance forever. Born in 1931, he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958, creating legendary works like Revelations that celebrated black culture while pushing the boundaries of modern choreography. His company became a cultural institution admired worldwide. Yet Ailey's life offstage was more complicated, marked by secrecy and struggle. Ailey never married, and within the dance community, his homosexuality was widely understood. The arts world was far more accepting than Hollywood or music, but even there, discretion was expected as his fame grew. Publicly, Ailey avoided discussing relationships, focusing instead on his company's mission and his role as a cultural leader. Privately, he dealt with periods of depression and self-doubt. Friends noted that the burden of being a prominent black artist, while hiding such a core part of his identity, left him isolated at times. The pressures of representation, carrying both his race and his sexuality in a judgmental society, took a toll. Still, Ailey's artistry offered liberation he couldn't always live in daily life. His choreography spoke of struggle, resilience, and beauty in ways words never could. Through dance, Alvin Ailey found a voice for truths he couldn't speak aloud. Billy Strayhorn, the genius behind Duke. Ellington. Billy Strayhorn may not be a household name, but anyone who's ever heard Duke Ellington's Take the A-Train knows his genius. Born in 1915, Strayhorn was a brilliant composer and arranger who shaped Ellington's sound for nearly 3 decades. Though often in Ellington's shadow, musicians recognized his work as some of the finest in jazz history. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Strayhorn was relatively open about his sexuality within trusted circles. Effeminate in manner and witty in company, he lived with his partner, musician Aaron Bridges, for many years. Together, they hosted gatherings in Harlem and later Queens, where black gay artists and intellectuals could find community away from mainstream scrutiny. Ellington, protective of Strayhorn's talent, gave him cover to live more freely than most gay men of his time. Still, Strayhorn carefully balanced discretion with authenticity, avoiding scandal while never denying who he was among friends. His letters and music carried hints of his truth, and many felt his compositions expressed a longing for freedom and acceptance. Some even speculated that Ellington's protective affection for Strayhorn blurred the line between professional and personal. Whether true or not, what's certain is that their partnership gave Strayhorn the safety to be himself, leaving behind music as timeless as his courage. Little Richard, the wild rock star who couldn't be contained. Little Richard didn't just perform rock and roll, he practically invented it. Born Richard Penniman in 1932, he exploded onto the scene with hits like Tutti Frutti and Good Golly Miss Molly, dazzling audiences in flamboyant outfits, heavy makeup, and high-energy performances. His influence stretched from Elvis to Prince, reshaping music forever. But behind the glitter, Richard lived in contradiction. At times, he openly admitted he was gay, only to later denounce it under pressure from religion and upbringing in the conservative South. His relationship with drummer Charles Connor was a frequent subject of speculation, as the two were nearly inseparable on tour. Richard's habit of sharing rooms with young male bandmates only fueled the rumors. His internal battle was fierce. One moment he performed in drag, teasing audiences with sexual jokes about men. The next, he declared he had been saved from homosexuality through prayer. This cycle of coming out and retreating back into the closet repeated throughout his life. Little Richard's legacy is as complicated as it is monumental. A man who broke barriers on stage but spent decades wrestling with his truth in private. Bayard Rustin, the strategist who changed history. Bayard Rustin's name may not be as famous as Martin Luther King Jr.'s, but without him, the 1963 March on Washington might never have happened. Born in 1912, Rustin was a master organizer and strategist, a brilliant mind who believed deeply in nonviolent protest and coalition building. Yet, despite his enormous contributions to civil rights, his story was often pushed aside because he was openly gay in an era that punished it. Rustin had already been arrested in the 1940s for homosexual activity, and enemies of the civil rights movement used his sexuality to discredit him and the cause. To protect the movement, he often worked behind the scenes, his brilliance hidden from the spotlight. His most enduring relationship came later in life with Walter Nagel, a man decades younger who became his life partner. Earlier, Rustin shared a long bond with activist Davis Platt, and both relationships blended love with shared ideals of justice. Within activist circles, his sexuality was an open secret, yet Rustin himself refused to be ashamed of it. Balancing personal authenticity with political necessity, Rustin lived at the intersection of courage and compromise, leaving behind a legacy of progress and proof that love and justice can coexist even under pressure. Luther Vandross, the voice of romance with a silent heart. When Luther Vandross sang about love, millions swooned. Born in 1951, he built one of the smoothest catalogs in R&B history, with classics like Never Too Much and Here and Now. His songs became wedding staples and soundtracks for romance, making him the ultimate voice of passion and desire. But Vandross's own love story remained unspoken. Within the industry, it was widely understood that he was gay, but publicly, he never came out. His management worked tirelessly to maintain his image as a romantic leading man for women, and Luther himself carefully sidestepped any questions about relationships. Friends recalled his humor when dodging interviews, and his reluctance to reveal anything personal became almost legendary. Behind the scenes, the weight of secrecy took its toll. Vandross battled food issues and health struggles, with some close friends suggesting that the stress of hiding his identity fed into his emotional eating and self-doubt. When he died in 2005, the speculation about his private life never truly ended. But what mattered most was his unmatched gift. Songs that gave voice to love, even if he couldn't live his own publicly. Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack's most complicated star. Sammy Davis Jr. could do it all: sing, dance, act, and charm audiences across the world. Born in 1925, he rose from vaudeville to Hollywood fame, eventually joining Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin as part of the legendary Rat Pack. His versatility made him one of the most recognizable black entertainers of his era. But while his talent was undeniable, his personal life was tangled in rumors. Hollywood gossip often centered on Davis's sexual fluidity. Friends and colleagues whispered about his relationships with male dancers and choreographers, particularly a creative partner named Tony, who was by his side throughout his Vegas heyday. Davis also became known for lavish parties at his Beverly Hills home, gatherings where anything goes was the unspoken rule. Guests described him as openly flirtatious with both men and women, even if the tabloids never printed it. His marriage to actress Mae Britt drew headlines, seen by some as genuine love, by others as an effort to silence speculation. Protected by Sinatra's influence, Davis avoided major scandal, but the balancing act of being both a black superstar in a segregated America and a man with fluid desires was exhausting. Sammy Davis Jr. mastered every stage he touched, but the role of hiding his truth may have been his hardest performance. Paul Winfield, a dignified talent who chose privacy. Paul Winfield built his career on dignity and intelligence. Born in 1939, he played roles that broke barriers, from Sounder, which earned him an Oscar nomination, to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. On television, he brought depth to shows like Julia and L.A. Law, paving the way for future generations of black actors to be seen as complex and human. Off-screen, Winfield's life was marked by discretion. Industry insiders knew he was gay, but he carefully kept his romantic life away from the press. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Winfield chose dignity over drama, focusing interviews solely on his work. His most significant relationship was with architect Charles Gillen Jr., whom he met in the 1970s. Together, they lived quietly for over 20 years, supporting one another's careers while keeping their bond private. When Winfield died of a heart attack in 2004, colleagues remembered him not only as a trailblazing actor, but also as a generous mentor. Gillen inherited his estate and continued to honor his partner's wishes by rarely speaking publicly about their relationship. Paul Winfield's life reminds us that sometimes the strongest statement is made not by spectacle, but by quiet resilience and grace. The stories of these 20 men remind us that fame does not erase fear, and talent does not cancel the weight of secrecy. They built careers that shaped film, music, and culture, yet many lived with parts of themselves locked away because the world wasn't ready to accept them. Their journeys reveal the cost of hiding, but also the resilience it takes to keep creating under pressure. For today's audience, the lesson is clear. Authenticity should never be a luxury. Every person deserves the freedom to live openly, without sacrificing love or dignity for the sake of survival. As society grows more inclusive, it's important to honor those who paved the way, often silently, often painfully, so future generations can walk more freely. By remembering their hidden truths, we celebrate not just what they created, but the courage it took to simply exist in their time.